Hey friends, what's up? And welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 9 of Masechta Beitzah. We get up to a new Mishnah today. Ha ha. So what do you think? It'll be easier or harder? I don't know, I guess it's up to you to find out, but I can tell you what it talks about. It talks about dovecotes. What's a dovecote? It's like these things, like, oh gosh, how do I even explain it? I don't know. It's like these things that I guess doves live in. They have like windows and stuff. And yeah, can you move like ladders, dovecotes, windows, things like that. We get into Maris Ayin a little bit, which is interesting, right? If you have to be, concerned about people, the yentis, thinking that maybe you're doing something that you're not, and how that applies to being in public versus private. And then we get onto different kinds of ladders in the context of dovecotes, exciting stuff. Let's get started. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter daf today, I think, because honestly, there just wasn't such a great place to stop. So we're going to stop actually a little bit high up. All right, let's get started. Daf Tes Amud Aleph, new Mishnah. Beishamai ein molichin es asula mishovach l'shovach ava mater michal l'cholin v'sil matirin. So we're going back now to Beis Shammai being more stringent and Beis Hillel being more lenient, which of course is sort of the general kind of way that things fall into place. Of course, in last Mishnah, we had three examples where Beis Shammai was the more lenient opinion and Beis Hillel was the more stringent opinion. Over here, we see once again Beis Shammai is the more stringent opinion. Beis Shammai Omrim, let's read that again. Beis Shammai say, Ein molichin es asulon mishovach l'shovach. You may not bring, if you have multiple dovecotes. Now, dovecotes, I don't really know how to explain it. It's like a pole, maybe Google it or something, like a pole with almost like a dollhouse for doves, I guess. And there's like different windows and doves live in different windows and stuff. So if you want to move your ladder from one to the other, I think it's so you can chaparain a fagel, a bird that you want to eat. So you can just go in there, reach for a bird and say, I'm going to eat you. And then, Simchas Yom Tov. So says Beis Shammai, you're not allowed to move a ladder from one dovecote to another dovecote. But if you have a ladder already at a dovecote, so then you can move it around, you can tilt it from one window to the next window. Beis Hillel says you can even move a ladder from one dovecote to the next. Omer Rav Chanan bar Ami says Rav Chanan bar Ami machlokas b'shus harabim. So says Rav Chanan bar Ami that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is specifically in the public domain, where other people could see you. The yentis. The Beis Shammai sabre haroeh Omer latiach gago utzarch. So Beis Shammai says, look, the Maise, they're going to be yentis. If you're in Rishus Harabim, people are going to see you, and people are going to assume the worst. They're going to say, what's this guy doing moving a ladder from one dovecote to another? He's probably fixing his roof on Yom Tov. That's probably what he's doing. And, because of them, because of these yentis, Beis Shammai says, look, just avoid moving one ladder from one dovecote to the next. So Beis Hillel sabe, shovcho micheach olav, whereas Beis Hillel says, look, the fact of the matter is, this ladder is not at your house, it's not at your roof, it's at a dovecote. So memele, the fact that it's by a dovecote shows that you're not fixing your roof, you're just chopping lunch. But in your own private domain, where you don't have to worry about yentis, even Beis Shammai will say that you're allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to the next. Ini, is this really true? Is this really true that while in Rishus Harabim you have to be concerned about yentis and what they're going to think, but once already you go into your own private space, you don't have to be concerned about it anymore? But Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that whenever we have to be concerned about Maris Ha'ayin, whenever we have to be concerned about what the yentis are going to say, it's not just in public. It's even in the most private places. B'chadri chadarim, in the deepest rooms, where nobody's going to see. Still, you don't do it. So therefore, why should it matter if you're in Rishus Harabim or Rishus HaYachid? If we're concerned about yentis, yentis are everywhere. Even b'chadri chadarim, even in private spaces. So Tanoi, to which the Gemara says, well, this view of Rav is actually a machlokas Tanoi, about whether you have to be concerned about the same thing in private as you do about public, as when you're in public. The Tanya is we learn in a Beitzah. If you have a fellow that his clothing gets sopping wet, it's Shabbos, and he's in a rainstorm, his clothing gets sopping wet. Shotchem b'chama avolo keneged om. So Tanna Kama says, look, you could take your clothes and put them out to dry in the sun, but just don't put them in a public, in a place where other people will see, because then people might think you did laundry on Shabbos, nudniks, yentis. So says the Tanna Kama, look, you could put out your clothing to dry, but do it in a private place where the yentis aren't going to see. Whereas Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon osun. Whereas Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon say, look, you can't put it out, because just like we're concerned about yentis in a place, in an open area, we're also concerned about yentis even in a private area. So Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon say, don't put out your clothing to dry it all. So we see that the Tanna Kama is not really concerned about the the private spaces. It's fine. Whereas Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon say, like Rav, that if you're worried about Maris Ha'ayin, you're worried about it everywhere. Whereas says Rav Chanan Bar Ami that not everybody agrees with that, and therefore he says that this machlokas is only in public, but in private, you can do whatever you want. Like the Tanna Kama says that in private you could, the Tanna Kama in the Beitzah says in private you could put out your clothing to dry. That those who say Omer Rav Chanan Bar Ami machlokas b'shus hayachid, that dafka this machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is actually in the private domain. That Beis Hillel says in the private domain you are allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to the next. The Beis Shammai islu to Rav Yehuda Marab, Beis Hillel islu to Rav Yehuda Marab. That Beis Shammai, let's go weiter for a second. But in the public domain, everyone says that it's forbidden, right? So in the public domain where there's yentis around, so everyone says you're not allowed to move. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, it's unanimous. You're not allowed to move bipartisan. You're not allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to the next in a public area where there's yentis all over. In a private area, Beis Shammai is is in line with what Rav Yehuda Marav says, which is that just like in public you have to be concerned, in private oichet you have to be concerned. Whereas Beis Hillel says no, while in public you have to be concerned, in private you don't have to be concerned, and you can move the ladder from one dovecote to the next. Lema Rav Damer Kid Beis Shammai. So 1 second, I don't understand. Are we saying that Rav is saying like Beis Shammai? Right? Beis Shammai is the one who says that just like you're not allowed to move the ladder, right? According to the second reading of Rav Chanan Bar Ami, Beis Shammai is the one who's saying, like Rav is saying, which is that you're not allowed to, just like in public, you're not allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to the next. Also in private, you're not allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to the next, because you have to be concerned about yentis everywhere. So is it possible that we're saying that Rav holds like Beis Shammai? I mean, obviously Rav is going to hold like Beis Hillel. We always hold like Beis Hillel. So the Gemara answers, look, Tanoi, the Tani shotchem b'chama v'lo keneged om for Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon osun. Look, we said it's taka machlokas Tanoim about how to understand this, right? That according to the Tanna Kama, so while you have to be concerned in public, you don't have to be concerned in private, and therefore, okay, so that's not like Rab, but Rab would hold like the other, right? And therefore, according to the Tanna Kama, right? According to the Tanna Kama, who says you don't have to be concerned, about meaning in. So according to Tanna Kama, he says that you can put out your clothing to dry in a private area, but not in a public area, because while you have to be concerned about the yentis in the public area, but you don't have to be concerned about it in the private area, and therefore you could say that Beis Hillel is also saying the same thing when it comes to the dovecotes, that in public you have to be concerned, but in private you don't have to be concerned. Whereas Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon say that you're not allowed to put out your clothing to dry on Shabbos in the public area or in the private area, and they would also say that according to Beis Hillel, you're allowed to both move the ladder in public as well as in private. Right? They're not going to say that it's forbidden in public but permitted in private. Says the Gemara, Masisins lo ki aitana. Okay, so let's say that our read of that our Mishnah and the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not like the following Beitzah. Because we said in our Mishnah that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is, can you move a ladder from one dovecote to the next, right? Even Beis Shammai says that you're allowed to tilt the ladder from one window to the next. But when it comes to moving the ladder from one dovecote to the next, Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to do that. Beis Hillel says you are allowed to do that. Let's say that our Mishnah is not like the following Beitzah. The Tanya is we learn in a Beitzah, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Modim Beis Shammai uVeis Hillel, shemolichin es hasulam mishovach l'shovach. Both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you're allowed to move this ladder from one dovecote to the next. Both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you're allowed to move a ladder from one dovecote to the next. Lo nechleku ella, where do they argue? Lehachzir, can you then bring it back to the original position? Shebeis Shammai omrim ein machzirin, uVeis Hillel omrim af machzirin. Whereas where Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to put it back to the original location, whereas Beis Hillel says you can even bring it back to the original location. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, Bamed Dvar Memurim Besulam Shel Shovach. Says Rabbi Yehuda, this discussion that we're talking about, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, this machlokas, can you return it? Can you not return it? Can you bring a ladder, to a dovecote, move it between dovecotes? So that is only a dovecote ladder. But if we're talking about a ladder that's for roofs, forget about it. Everyone agrees, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say, just leave it alone. Don't go near a roof ladder, because a roof ladder, people can assume that it's that you're like using it for your roof or whatever, and that's not good. So therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda that this machlokas, and also where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you're allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to the next, that specifically we're talking about a dovecote ladder. But a roof ladder, forget about it. Reb Dosa Omer says, Reb Dosa Mateu Michal Nechalon. Reb Dosa says that you're allowed to move the ladder from one window to the next, and we're going to have to discuss what this is talking about. Is this talking about a roof ladder? Is it talking about a dovecote ladder? Acherim Omim Mishum Reb Dosa Af Madden Bo, and Acherim say in the name of Reb Dosa that you can even move the ladder, not just tilt it from one window to the next, but if the windows are far away, you can even kind of, step it, jump it from like one, move it over a little bit, step it over a little bit. B'nei Reb Chia Nafel Kiryasa. So the sons of Reb Chia went out to the villages to kind of, inspect the fields apparently. Kiyasu Amru Avuon Klumaise B'Liedchem. And when they came back, their father Reb Chia, he said, "No, so did anybody ask you any halachic shaylas?" Amrulot, and they responded to Reb Chia, "Yes." Sulam b'aliyadenu vitarnu. They asked us, can we take a attic ladder, a roof ladder, and bring it over to the dovecote on Yom Tif? And we said, yeah, sure, no problem. How come? So Amar Lohem su'u ve'isru mashi itartem. To which Reb Chia says, oh, you guys messed up. You're not allowed to take an attic ladder, a roof ladder, to, what did we say? We said sulam shel aliyah, so an attic ladder. You're not allowed to take an attic ladder and bring it over to the dovecotes. How come they thought that you were? Because inu saver, because they thought midika Amar Reb Yehuda besulam shel aliyah lo plige. Well, because from the fact that Reb Yehuda said in the Beitzah that we just learned, that everyone agrees, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree, it's unanimous, that when it comes to an attic ladder, it's osur. You're not allowed to take it over to the dovecotes. So Mechlad Tanakama sover plige. Well, that implies that according to the Tanakama, they would argue about an attic ladder. That Beis Shammai would say that you're not allowed to put it back in its original place. Beis Hillel would say that you are allowed to put it back in its original place. But in terms of can you schlep it over from the attic to the dovecotes, of course you can. The sons of Reb Chia assumed that from the fact that Reb Yehuda argues and says that everyone, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, agree that you're not allowed to use an attic ladder, that ultimately implies that according to the Tanakama, you would be allowed to use an attic ladder. You would be allowed to schlep it over. Viloi, but that's not true, because rather the way to understand it is Rabbi Yehuda Taimid the Tanakama Komefarish. Rabbi Yehuda is really just explaining the reasoning of the Tanakama. It's explaining the opinion of the Tanakama. That when the Tanakama says that there's a machlokas about returning the ladder, but everyone agrees that you'd be allowed to, move it from one dovecote to the next, Rabbi Yehuda is explaining that that's specifically a dovecote ladder. But everyone would agree that an attic ladder is off limits, because you might think that people are like fixing their roof or whatever. Mimai, and how do we know that this is true? Well, midikatani molichin es asulam mishovach l'shovach. From the fact that if we look at the Beitzah, what does it say? That everyone agrees that you're allowed to move the ladder from one dovecote to another dovecote, i.e., a dovecote ladder that's already at one dovecote, you can move to another dovecote. And if you're going to tell me that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing when it comes to the ladder of a roof, and that when it comes to in that they argue specifically about returning it, but schlepping it over, they would agree that it's acceptable. Well, then molichin es asulam mishovach lishovach, molichin es asulam lishovach mibayle. It shouldn't say that you could bring it mishovach lishovach from one dovecote to another. Rather, if we're talking about the ladder of an attic, it should say molichin es asulam lishovach, that you can take a ladder and bring it over to the dovecote, because it wasn't there before. But it doesn't say that in the Beitzah. What it says is that you could bring the ladder from one dovecote to another dovecote, i.e., we're talking about a dovecote ladder. We're talking about bringing it from one to the other. If we're talking about an attic ladder, it should mention, well, can you bring a ladder to the dovecotes in the first place, i.e., from the attic? But it doesn't say that, so we must be talking about a dovecote ladder. So rather what it is saying is that, you could bring a dovecote ladder from one dovecote to the next. You cannot bring an attic ladder over to the dovecotes. Sounds like fun. V'idach mikatani sulam shel shovach mishovach l'shovach katani afilu l'chama shovchin. Whereas the sons of Reb Chia said, look, at the end of the day, it's not super clear. It's not crystal clear, right? Mikatani sulam shel shovach. Does it say specifically it has to be a dovecote ladder? No. Mishovach l'shovach katani. It just says from one dovecote to another. Afilu l'chama shovchin, even a whole bunch of shovchin, and even from an attic to a dovecote. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. That's what that's how the sons of Reb Chia thought to understand it. All right, sounds fun. Igid Amr, those who say Amrulo hitu isulam shalalia bali adenu vitanu. There are those who say that actually what happened with the sons of Reb Chia was that they said, we were asked the question about if you have a attic ladder, can you tilt it from one window of a dovecote to another? And we said, yeah, of course you can. Omlem su ve'isu mashitartem, to which Reb Chia said to them, go out and forbid that which you said is permitted. Their rationale was, well, when Rabbi Yehuda says that according to everybody, an attic ladder is off limits, Reb Dosa is then coming to say, but you're allowed to move it from one window to another window. So they thought to say that Taka, it was okay. Velohi, it's not true. No, actually it's the opposite. So Reb Dosa is actually being even more stringent. He's not saying that you're allowed to tilt an attic ladder from one window to the next. No, he's being more stringent that Rabbi Yehuda says, look, when it comes to an attic ladder, everything's off limits, but when it comes to a regular ladder, you can move it, when it comes to a dovecote ladder, you can move it from one dovecote to the next. Reb Dosa is saying, no, you can only tilt it from one window to the next, even just a regular dovecote ladder. But certainly a attic ladder would not be allowed. All right, friends, what do you want me to tell you? That was daf 9 of Masechta Beitzah. So we got to a new Mishnah. The Mishnah said that According to Beis Shammai, you're allowed to tilt a ladder from one window of a dovecote to the next, but you can't bring it from one dovecote to the next. Beis Hillel says that you're even allowed to bring it from one dovecote to the next dovecote. We then had two opinions of Rav Chanan bar Ami about how to understand this machlokas. The first opinion is that the machlokas is in Rishus Harab. When it comes to Rishus HaYachid, everyone agrees that you would be allowed to move it from one dovecote to the next. We said, wait, but what about Rav, who says that Maris Ha'ayin applies both? If we have to be worried about it in Rishus Harab, we also have to be worried about it in Rishus HaYachid. So we said, look, L'maisa, that's machlokas Tanoim about whether you have to be concerned about Maris Ha'ayin and Rishus HaYachid. There was then a different way of Rav Chan, a different way of explaining Rav Chanan bar Ami, which is actually that the machlokas is specifically in Rishus HaYachid, that Beis Shammai says that you're not allowed to move from one dovecote to the next, and Beis Hillel says that you are. But in Rishus Harabim, everyone would say that it is also. And then we said that there was actually another way to understand the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which is actually both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say that you are allowed to move a ladder from one dovecote to the next. Where they argue is about, can you bring it back to the original one? Beis Shammai says no. Beis Hillel says yes. Then Rabbi Yehuda clarifies that this is specifically a dovecote ladder, but a attic ladder is off limits because people might think that you're like doing work with it. Friends, that was Daf 9 of Masechta Beitzah. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.